first two were stellar.
No.
I'm sure the third one will be great as well. Normally we have the department head introduce the presenter for our faculty seminar series. Dr. Brian Olson, head of the Department of Agribusiness and Economics, is out of town, and so I will do that on his behalf. Just a future entry. Today's presenter, Chad Lawley, grew up in Saskatchewan and got his first 2 degrees at the University of Saskatchewan, the MSc in Agricultural Economics, and then he moved on for his PhD to the University of Maryland, where he focused in the area of environment and resource economics. And when he came to the University of Manitoba in 2009, he was recognized on the basis of his expertise in the interaction between agriculture and environment. Since coming to the university, he's been conducting research in a number of areas, but it's perhaps his work on economics of habitat conservation easements that he's most recognized for, and for which he's received a SHRC Insight Development Grant. Some of the other projects that he has on the go include very current issues such as capitalized costs of flooding in the Red River Valley, rental rates, farmland ownership in Manitoba and Ontario, and an examination of best management practices, adoption rates, or adoption in Manitoba and Ontario. So certainly areas of interest for many of us. A little bit of work around invasive species. I guess the risk and the benefit of monitoring invasive species or screening for invasive species as well. The seminar today, which is the last of the faculty seminar series, is on conservation easements in agricultural landscapes. Win-win with a big question mark. Chad?
Right. Yeah. So thanks, Karen, and thanks to everyone for coming out today. Right, so I guess a lot of my work in Manitoba so far has been looking at land use issues. Okay? And today I'm going to talk about land use conversion. So obviously there's benefits and costs associated with converting prairie potholes and their surrounding upland habitat. Okay? Landowners that choose to convert obviously benefit in some way from doing so. Of course, conversion imposes costs on others. Okay? And anytime there's a case where private individuals are benefiting from something but imposing costs on others, there's going to be conflict. Okay? And that's what's happening, I'd argue, in conversion of prairie potholes. Okay? There's this conflict between private interests and public benefits. Policy challenges arise out of that. Okay? A couple of issues make it particularly challenging in the ag landscape. The first is that ag land is privately held. Okay, and so it's very difficult for a, say, government agency or a private conservation group to dictate land use behavior in the landscape. Okay. Secondly, even if they could dictate it, and even if they had a sense of what the optimal amount of prairie pothole habitat is, the fact that the landscape is so large and diverse makes monitoring and enforcement of any regulation very costly. Okay? So land use conflicts are often driven by property rights. Okay? The question here is who has control over land management decisions? And in Manitoba or Western Canada, even North America, landowners typically have the right to land management decisions. Okay? To the extent that the option to convert existing habitat has value, it's going to be capitalized into land values. What I mean by that is a landowner that's purchasing land is implicitly buying the right to convert any habitat that exists on the land. Okay? Regulations that remove this right impose costs on landowners. And so that's why the conflict arises. Okay, so conservation easements have emerged as a tool. So in the US, the Fish and Wildlife Service has been buying conservation easements on prairie potholes for many years. The US Conservation Reserve Program can be thought of as a temporary easement. Okay? In Canada, there is some conservation easement activity as well. Conservation easements, I think the fact that they've emerged as a tool is because they recognize the importance of property rights. Okay? So they're really taking advantage of the potential for mutually beneficial trades. What I mean by that is that members of society, so private groups, government agencies, can compensate landowners for giving up their right to convert habitat. Okay? So they're recognizing that the right to convert rests with the landowner. Okay? But if it's deemed worthwhile to purchase that right, they can do so. The Manitoba Conservation Agreements Act was signed, I think came into power sometime in the late 1990s. Okay, a number of similar acts were passed in all the Canadian provinces. These acts effectively reduced the transaction costs associated with engaging in these beneficial trades between landowners and agencies. All right, so right now there are 3 agencies purchasing easements in Manitoba. Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation, Ducks Unlimited, and Nature Conservancy. Just give a little bit of a background on what an easement is. It's a voluntary agreement between a landowner and a conservation agency. The landowner is forfeiting the right to convert existing habitat. Okay, so this is not a restoration program. It's a maintenance program of existing habitat. And they do so in perpetuity. So that implies that the easement follows the land title to subsequent buyers. Okay? In exchange, the agency is offering a one-time payment as compensation. So this is a one-time trade. The cash is given up front, and the landowner gives up the right to convert in perpetuity. Okay? Through the agreement, the agency also has a right to monitor and enforce the easement. I think of this as an example of conservation within working land. Okay, so the agency is not purchasing up large tracts of land and retiring it permanently. Okay, instead, they're protecting little parcels of habitat within working farmland. So this is an example of a conservation easement. The black hatched areas is eased property. So the landowner has agreed to not convert that. And like I said, the easement on that property follows the title. Okay? But of course, landowners are free to farm all of the cropland within that area. Okay, so I'm going to present the results, or present 3 projects, results from 2, and just talk about the third. Right, so this is joint work, this first project, with Charles Tao. He's an assistant professor at the University of Maryland. It's forthcoming hopefully soon, so it's an accepted article. We addressed 2 questions in this project. Okay? The first is, are landowners being adequately compensated for giving up this right to convert habitat? Okay, so does the payment that they receive exceed the cost to them of entering into that easement? Secondly, we're asking, are conservation agencies placing easements on at-risk habitat, or habitat that's likely to be converted? Okay. A new catchphrase in economics is additionality. Okay? This refers to programs that encourage new activity over and above what would have occurred without the program. So some examples. I guess researchers have looked at rebates on Energy Star household appliances. Okay, and the evidence from those studies suggests that a lot of the rebates are going to households that would have purchased the Energy Star appliance without the subsidy. Okay? So that's evidence of low additionality. It's not encouraging a lot of new purchasing. In agriculture, there's been some work on cost share programs for BMPs. Okay, a recent study out of Ohio shows that subsidies for conservation tillage tend to have low additionality. Okay, so the landowner or the producers who are accepting the subsidies probably would have adopted conservation tillage in the absence of the subsidy. Okay, but of course, other practices would have high additionality. So those practices that are less profitable tend to get bigger bang for the buck in a cost share program. Okay? More directly related to this study is a paper by Van Kooten and Schmitz from 1992. They did a survey of Saskatchewan producers. They looked at payments for conservation and found that a lot of the landowners accepting payments probably weren't going to convert the wetlands anyways. Okay? So, before this catchphrase of additionality came into lexicon, they were showing evidence of low additionality in conservation programs. We're really building on this paper 20 years later. Okay, so I'm going to think about conservation easements in a market framework. Okay, so the market has some buyers and sellers. The agency is buying an easement or buying the right to convert, and the landowner is selling that right to convert. Okay? The asset is being traded in exchange for a payment. Okay, so this is very much like a typical market would operate. The asset here is the right to convert existing habitat. And an assumption of these programs is that the landowner holds this right. Otherwise, agencies wouldn't be trying to purchase it. Agencies make take it or leave it offers. Okay, so it's a fixed payment scheme. Landowner deems it worthwhile to enter into the program or not. Okay? So it's a take it or leave it offer. If the landowner likes the offer, he puts an easement on the property. Okay, so on the demand side of this market are the conservation agencies. They rank the habitat that they want to enroll according to environmental benefits, as well as vulnerability to conversion. They measure vulnerability to conversion by the capability of the land once it's converted, or expected capability, as well as past conversion activity in the surrounding area. Okay, on the supply side, which is really what we're focusing on in this paper, are landowners. Okay, an important point here is that the net benefit of converting varies across the landscape. So there's a lot of heterogeneity out here. The benefits of converting depend on things like ag productivity in the converted land, the nuisance cost of existing habitat. Okay, so a property with wetlands dispersed throughout it is a big nuisance because you have to drive large machinery around it. The costs of converting depend on physical characteristics of the property, as well as the landowner's access to drainage or clearing equipment. Okay, so I'm gonna use this graph throughout the talk. I find it's a nice way to simplify my own thinking about this. Okay? On the vertical axis, we have dollars per acre. That's measuring landowners' expected net benefit of converting. And so this is a present value of all future benefits and costs to the landowner of converting. And so it's important to note that these are private net benefits to the landowner. Okay, I'm not accounting for any social benefits or costs of conversion here. Okay. On the horizontal axis is total existing habitat. Okay, and so the distance out to here is, for example, total existing habitat in southwestern Manitoba. And what I've done is I've ordered all that habitat in order of increasing net benefits of converting. Okay. So as an example, think of this as a patch of 5-acre upland. Okay, and the costs of converting exceed the benefits by $75 an acre. So it's a negative net benefit. Okay. Over here, this might be a 15-acre wetland where the benefits of converting exceed the costs by $125 an acre. And so what this green line represents is just a bunch of different patches of habitat place an order of increasing net benefits of converting. Okay, so over here, conversion costs exceed benefits. Okay, from a conservation agency's perspective, this is the free habitat. This is a habitat that current and future landowners likely won't find it worthwhile to convert. It just doesn't make financial sense for them to do so. Over here, conversion benefits exceed costs. Okay, and so this is the at-risk habitat. That's a habitat where future or current landowner might find it worthwhile to convert. Okay. Right, so now this red line represents the take it or leave it offer. Okay, so this is the fixed payment offered by the conservation agency. The agency is saying we'll pay you X dollars per acre of eased habitat. That's represented by the red line. And so the potential supply of easements is all habitat where the opportunity cost of converting is below that per acre payment. So it's saying that when you set a fixed per acre payment, you're going to miss some of that high valued habitat. Okay? Landowners just aren't going to offer it up in an easement. If we overlay that with the at-risk habitat, okay, this is the habitat that we expect the agency is going to target, because it's the most at risk. We're left with what we would expect to be the habitat most likely to be secured. Okay? So if a program is operating like we think it should, most of the secured habitat is going to be on that blue portion of the line. Okay? And the exercise in this research is to estimate the capitalized cost of easements. And the capitalized cost is going to lie somewhere between 0 and the per acre payment, okay? If the program's operating like we expect it to. Okay, so like I said, this first project is estimating a capitalized cost of easements. That's really just putting a value on the right to convert existing habitat that's been placed into an easement. We're basing this off of estimates of differences in sales prices between eased and non-eased parcels. So this is what an economist would refer to as a revealed preference approach. Okay, so we're using actual market interactions to infer the preferences of land buyers and land sellers. Okay? So as opposed to giving them a survey and asking them their opinion, we're using their actual behavior to infer it. Right, so now coming to data. Our study area was southwestern Manitoba. You can see Brandon is basically in the center. Portage is just on the boundary. This is where most of the easements in Manitoba are signed. The provincial assessor was nice enough to provide me with all bare agricultural land sales in this region. Okay. They provided the data sale, quarter sections contained in the sale, land characteristics like acreage and habitat or under cultivation, as well as the sale price. Okay. Similarly, MHHC and DUC were nice enough to provide me with their easement data. Okay. So I have all conservation easements in that region. They provided the date the easement was signed, as well as the quarter sections within the encumbered acreage. Okay, and so combining these two data sets makes for a really unique data set. And this is the first study of its kind looking at this topic. Okay, so this graph shows a map of easement activity in Manitoba. So this is between approximately 2000 and 2010. Each green square represents a quarter section with some acreage under easement. Okay, so if we go back to this graph, those blue points are, for example, some of those green squares just plotted on this graph. Okay? I don't actually know what this line looks like. If I did, I could take those easements, plot them on there. Okay? What I'm really interested in here, though, is the impact of an easement on sales values. So I overlaid these two data sets. Okay? And so this graph shows all sales that had an easement on them prior to the sale. Okay? So each purple square is a quarter section where at least some of it had an easement on it prior to it being sold. Okay? So if I plotted those in that graph, I would have these little orange dots. Okay, and so we can see that just a subset of the parcels had an easement on them prior to a sale. Okay? I'm calling these the treated sales parcels. So I'm casting this in a treatment and control framework. And the treatment here is to have an easement. Okay? And the outcome is the sales value. Okay, so we're attempting to derive causal inference from observational data. Okay? In an ideal setting, DUC and MHHC would give me a couple $1 million, and I would just randomly allocate easements on the landscape. Okay, I'd observe sales, and I'd do my study. That's obviously not going to happen. Okay? And in fact, that might not be all that interesting. Okay, that would give me a clean estimate of the impact of an easement on a sale. But what's interesting here is the behavioral component. Okay? What I mean by that is it's potential, it's possible that there are landowners not behaving the way a naive economist might think. Okay? So there might be warm glow landowners out there who place an easement on habitat because it makes them feel good. Okay? Although it doesn't, it makes them worse off financially. Okay? And that's interesting. It's interesting to know about. It's interesting to know how prevalent that is. Similarly, there might be, the agencies might be making mistakes. Okay? It might be really difficult to assess risk of conversion. Okay? And so they might be signing up a lot of zero additionality habitat. So habitat that's not at risk of conversion. It could be mistakes, or it could be that they have to take on that habitat because it's bundled up with higher risk habitat and the landowner wants all of it eased. Okay? And so that's interesting as well, to test the prevalence of say, zero additionality habitat being signed up, or how much of it is warm glow landowners. Okay? And I couldn't do that if I was randomly assigning easements, because I take the behavior of the conservation agency and the landowner out of the picture. Okay, and so, right, anytime you're working with observational data, there's a potential for selection issues. Okay, because I'm not randomly assigning easements, easements are voluntary, there's a potential for bias. So first, agencies are likely targeting parcels with more habitat. Okay, so that means their easements are going to be found on lower valued land. Secondly, we'd expect landowners to enroll habitat with the lowest opportunity cost first. So once again, easements will probably be placed on lower valued land. And so the study has to account for this in some way. The technique that we use is referred to as propensity score matching. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. What it attempts to do is take those treated sales, the sales with easements, find a set of comparable control sales. Okay? And we do this, the comparison is made on the basis of the likelihood to have an easement. Okay? So the likelihood to have an easement is called a propensity score. How we approach this is first collect a lot of data. Okay, and so we want to collect as much data as possible that affects both the likelihood that a parcel has an easement as well as the ag land values. So we want to try to characterize selection into treatment as well as the outcome that we're interested in. Okay? So we do that by estimating a logit model. We're characterizing this likelihood a parcel has an easement. And then we match match treated to control sales on the basis of this propensity score. So this is what we're doing. So PS stands for propensity score. Okay, this is the likelihood that these parcels have an easement. We have some treated sale highlighted in green. It has about a 50% likelihood of having an easement based on, for example, the logit model that I estimated. Okay? And there's some surrounding non-treated sales that we've estimated propensities for as well. Okay? And in this example, I'm going to select the 5 non-treated sales with the closest propensity scores. And I drop out the rest. So this becomes my set of comparable land sales without easements. They're called matched control sales. So I'm simplifying things a lot here. But the final step is to look at the outcome. So this might be sales value per acre. Okay? And just compare on the basis of sales prices between the treated and the matched sales. Okay, so there are a number of ways to do that comparison. We do 4. I'm not going to talk about all 4. The first row there is the average capitalized cost of easements. So that's the number we were looking to estimate. Okay. What you can take away from this is if we do some conversions of this data to make them all comparable, all the estimates comparable, they come out roughly the same. They tell the same story. And so the results are robust. Okay. We'll focus in on this red highlighted result. That's our baseline. Okay. It suggests that there's an $86 discount for each acre of eased habitat. Okay. The fact that this confidence interval doesn't include 0 suggests that, on average, they've been targeting habitat at risk of conversion. Okay, we don't have systematic evidence that they've been converting this very low-risk habitat. So I just plot this back on the graph. Okay? The per acre payment is roughly $100 an acre. My estimate suggests that the average capitalized cost is $86 an acre. So this suggests that, on average, the landowners that participated in the easement program were better off. Okay, they made a little bit of money on the deal. The fact that, so that orange ellipse might represent the confidence interval. The fact that that doesn't include 0 suggests that they're targeting at-risk habitat. Okay, so just to conclude, there's one previous study that looks at premiums from a conservation payment program, and specifically the US Conservation Reserve Program. They find that the auction payments are about 10 to 40% above opportunity cost. So they're providing about a 10 to 40% premium. We're estimating a 16% premium from this fixed payment scheme. So it suggests that the two schemes are comparable. We don't see significant cost savings from an auction program. Okay. Secondly, it looks like Manitoba conservation agencies have been able to target habitat at risk of conversion. So it's evidence of additionality in the program. Okay. And so the title of the talk had win-win in it. I guess you've got the answer that I'm providing. And it's yes, it looks like landowners are benefiting and agencies are benefiting. Okay. All right, so I'll move on to a second paper. So here, I take that land transaction data set, and I look at what is the impact of just habitat itself on land values. We expect there to be a discount. The primary question I'm asking here is, has that discount changed over time? Okay, and so I used 20 years of data to do so. I'll get to the implications for easements when I conclude this part. Okay, so I'm going to approach this using what's referred to as a hedonic model. Okay. Hedonic models just attempt to assign prices to characteristics of goods that aren't traded directly in a market. So if we think of a house, okay, we trade houses, but we don't trade individual bathrooms within a house or kitchens within a house. Okay? So a hedonic model is an attempt to price different characteristics of a good that aren't traded directly. So it's an attempt to put a price, for example, on a second bathroom in a house. Okay? And the notion is that you're trying to hold all other characteristics constant. I apply this type of a model to ag land values in Manitoba. Okay, and so ag land values are, of course, a function of things like soil productivity, the location of the property. They're also likely a function of the amount of arable acreage. Okay? Or put another way, the amount of existing habitat within the parcel. Right, so the primary objective here is to estimate the discount due to prairie pothole habitat. This hasn't been done before. And so it took me a while in the paper, I guess, to discuss how you might interpret discounts. So for factors like, for example, soil productivity that a farmer doesn't have a lot of control over, okay? Estimating a price on something like that is pretty straightforward. Habitat, on the other hand, can be converted. And so the landowner has some control over how much existing habitat there is on a property. Okay? And what I discuss in the paper is that when I estimate this discount on habitat, it reflects the benefits of conversion when conversion is not worthwhile. Conversely, it reflects the cost of conversion when conversion is worthwhile. Okay? And so when I interpret the results, I have to take that into account. Because I don't observe which parcels have habitat that's worthwhile converting and which ones don't. Okay? Right, so I estimate a land value model for 5 4-year periods. I take that land transaction data, I overlay it with a bunch of geo-referenced soil and physical data. Okay? And I ask the question of discounts and habitat changed over time. And as I argue in the paper, the estimates that I get should be interpreted as a conservative estimate of the increase in the benefits of conversion. Okay? And so I'm just going to jump straight into some results. Okay? And keep in mind, I'm estimating these discounts on acreage, holding a bunch of other characteristics of the property constant. Okay? So I control for a lot of characteristics of each of these properties. Right, so I've got 3 graphs here. On the left-hand side is a 25th percentile of the land distribution. Okay, so these are discounts due to habitat acreage on lower valued land. In the middle, I'm looking at median valued land. Okay, and so these are estimates of discounts on median valued land. And then, of course, out here in the 75th percentile, that's estimates of discounts on higher valued ag land. Along this axis, we have different sale periods. Okay, so I'm estimating different discounts at different points in time, and then just looking at how they change. So, for example, native hay at the 25th percentile, the land distribution, say for 1990-93, this result suggests that a 1% increase in native hay acreage reduces the sale price by just over 0.5%. Okay? So let's focus in on native hay. These estimates bounce around a lot over time. Okay? It looks like there might be a slight downward trend. When I test for the statistical significance of the changes, say from 90 to 93 to 06, 09, I can't find any statistical difference. So it looks like the discount on native hay hasn't changed over time. I can say the same thing for bush and pasture. Okay, so for low valued land, it looks like it fell. Medium valued land, it looked about constant over time. Some evidence that it might have increased for high valued land. Okay, but when I pool this and test for statistical significance, there's nothing. Wetlands are a different story. So you can see the discount started out right around -1 in 1993. By 2006, 2009, that discount had increased by approximately 40%. Okay? And when I test the statistical significance of this, it suggests that that 40% increase in the discount was statistically significant. Okay, so it provides strong evidence that there was this increase in the discount. And I'm interpreting that as a conservative estimate of the increase in the benefits of converting wetlands. Okay. This isn't a causal model. Okay, so I don't know why this big change occurred. Perhaps it was crop prices more recently. Okay, but that would just be speculation on my part. I've observed this change. So this has some implications for conservation easements. Okay, so if these discounts change significantly over time, it suggests that there's likely a large uncertainty premium being priced into the current payments. Okay, so the conservation agencies are required to, in a sense, compensate landowners for this uncertainty. Okay, so it's possible that there could be cost savings from shorter duration contracts. On the flip side, long-term agreements protect agencies. Okay, and so experience right now with the US CRP, which has shorter duration contracts, suggests that it's really hard to re-enroll land in a time of high crop prices. Okay, so a long-term agreement protects the agency from that kind of risk. And then, of course, agencies are always subject to budget constraints, okay, and there's variation over time. And so shorter duration contracts would require ongoing sources of funding. And that just might not be available to them. Okay, so the third project I'm going to talk about is ongoing. So I'm not going to present results. I'm just going to give you a flavor of the direction that we're heading. So this is ongoing work with Wenhong Yang. He's a geographer at the University of Guelph. He does a lot of work in Manitoba. Okay? Basically, what we're doing here is identifying spatial interactions among easements. Okay? So we observe that easements are clustering spatially. One of the questions is why. Okay, so there's three factors that might influence it. First, just spatial correlation of landscape features. So parcels that are next to each other are likely to be similar, likely to have similar characteristics, and to be equally attractive as eased property. Okay? Secondly, there's benefits to contiguous habitat. So the agencies actually target parcels that have neighboring habitat and even better, neighboring eased habitat, neighboring protected habitat. Okay, so one of their objectives is to spatially cluster easements. And then thirdly, neighbors might learn from other neighbors. So if a neighbor has a good experience with MHHC or DUC, they might tell their neighbors. Their neighbors are now more likely to place an easement. Okay? Point 1 isn't really interesting, at least to me. Points 2 and 3 are, though. Okay? Because they suggest that history matters, that actions taken today place constraints on or change incentives in the future. Okay, and so it's evidence of path dependence. So what's done today changes the path that's taken in the landscape in the future. And that's interesting. It's also difficult to identify. And that's what we're attempting to do in this project. So there has been some work on this. There's a lot of work in economics on the role of social networks or contagion among agents. There's been some work on protected areas, okay, trying to tease out whether or not there are, whether or not agencies appear to be buying up land contiguously. Okay. A lot of this work has not done a very good job of separating spatial correlation of landscape features from path dependence. Okay, and it's because they're dealing with data sets that look something like this. Okay, so they're just observing spatially clustered easements. Okay, they don't know the sequence of easement events. Okay, in this study, what we're attempting to do is utilize the sequence of conservation easements over time, okay, that allows us to control for these unobservable, say, spatially correlated factors and hopefully tease out evidence of path dependence. So we're doing something more like this. So perhaps there's an easement placed on this property in 2002. The question is, does that easement increase the likelihood of surrounding parcels having an easement at some point in the future? Okay? And so we might observe a sequence that looks something like this, where, yeah, easements do tend to cluster. Okay, so observing that allows us to control for some of the spatially correlated unobservables in the background and tease out evidence of path dependence. What would be really interesting would be to separate out the incentives of the agencies from just neighbors learning from each other. It's not going to be possible with this data, okay, but we can say that what we identify is comprised of those two factors. I guess one of the objectives here is to test for strategic interactions between agencies and government protected areas. So do agencies tend to locate next to other agencies' easements? Do they have a preference for their own easements? Do they locate next to government protected areas? Okay. And that is it. So this is a brief summary of results. Presented 3 projects. The first one, if we boil it down to a sentence, says that our evidence suggests that easements are benefiting both landowners and agencies. Secondly, we find strong evidence that the benefits of converting wetlands in southwestern Manitoba has increased substantially over the last 20 years. Okay? And then finally, we're looking for evidence of path dependence in easement activity. I should acknowledge some funding sources. So one of the old Ag Canada research networks funded this. SHRC provided some funding. I have to thank MHHC and DUC for the conservation easement data, as well as the provincial assessor. And then Brian Miller worked for me for quite a while, I guess 8 months or a year or something like that, doing a lot of collection of the GIS data. And he's now a grad student in soil science. Just happy to hear that. Yes, yeah, that's good. Yeah, I drove him away. Yeah. So, I guess.
Thank you. So we do know that the question mark is really an exclamation mark.
Right.
Any questions? Any?
Yes.
When the land is sold and has an easement on it, who owns that easement? Is it sold with it or without it?
So, I guess, MHHC or DUC sort of, it's a constraint on the use of that property. And those agencies are permitted to monitor and enforce any violations of it. But the landowner owns the property. Is that right?
So the owner too didn't get the dollars from the agency to preserve that land. So what is the incentive for owner two to keep it where it is?
So the point of this is they bid down the value of the land, equal to the value of that easement. So the first buyer bought the land, was implicitly buying the option to convert that habitat. That option is removed. The first landowner receives a payment. Okay? And now subsequent landowners are free to bid down the value of the land because they're no longer purchasing that option to convert.
But when you, because when you buy land, it's normally so many arable acres, whatever it happens to be. And so even though it's a quarter section, you do buy the quarter section, but only so many are arable.
Yes.
Now you've got this extra restriction on that.
That's right. Yeah. It's just an encumbrance on the property. Yeah, that's right. Good question.
Chad?
Yeah.
I'm a little bit familiar with the CRP program from the state side, and so you mentioned some of the disadvantage of the short-term programs and renewal of that, and you mentioned that and other things like that. So from my experience down there, I often saw that because it was a renewable program and shorter term, you often had larger land masses, say a section or so, rather than just land that was a wetland or a bush or things like that. So
Yeah.
how do those benefits fit in? And could those benefits would it be ever worth implementing here?
Yeah. So I think that part of the program isn't necessarily due to the duration of the contracts.
Okay.
It's my understanding, the point of the CRP is to retire large tracts that have been converted to cropland back to grassland or wetlands,
Yeah.
right?
But when sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so go
I
ahead.
was just wondering, when they do come due, I guess, or when they expire, often I saw them go back to cropland or stay in, depending upon the individual situation, I guess. Is that seen as a benefit?
Well, I guess it's more flexibility for the landowner,
Yeah.
so it might benefit the landowner. From the agency's perspective, from the conservationist perspective, I'm sure they'd prefer longer-term conservation. Like I said, you'd expect that the payments they have to offer wouldn't have to have as large of an uncertainty premium if they are shorter duration. Yeah, and one of the things about CRP is it is retiring entire parcels,
Yeah.
whereas these are just protecting small patches of habitat. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Terry?
Okay. Yes.
I've always wondered when I see the term in perpetuity, is that a real term? What if, for example, the agency is dissolved, or what if, for example, mineral rights or oil or something are involved beneath these easements? What happens to this land?
Well, I think a court order can always overturn something, right? It's, they're signed with the intention of being in perpetuity, is my understanding. Minerals, go ahead.
I was just going to say, mines and minerals are specifically excluded, so
Okay.
properties with an easement can be developed. Yeah, the surface right can be allowed for the exploitation.
Oh,
There's
okay.
an easement on it.
Okay.
Maybe we should have just a very quick introduction.
Sorry, Tim Sopak, Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation.
Mitch, you had a question?
Yes.
So the $100 an acre, that was about the average compensation.
Yeah, that's sort of a rough price.
Do you have any sort of data or even an idea of how many farmers rejected them? Like, didn't think that was enough compensation?
No, I guess you'd have to talk to the field staff with MHHC and DOC to get a sense of.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if they felt that was enough for their farmers.
Yeah, certainly there are a lot of landowners who aren't signing up habitat. It just doesn't make sense for them. That's right. What I'm showing is that the landowners that did choose to sign up habitat appear to have done okay. That's right.
I don't know if it's the same with a governmental easement, but with a corporate easement. For example, if I have a private power company and I get an easement in perpetuity for power lines on the land, if the company goes bankrupt, it's still an asset of the company. It doesn't revert back to the landowner. So I would suspect if Habitat Heritage, I'd assume that's a semi-governmental organization, maybe I'm wrong, it would stay with the government. It doesn't matter that they no longer exist.
Right. That's kind of independent of this study, the perpetuity part of this.
Question?
Yes.
Under the Manitoba Water Rights Act, which is predates this one,
Okay.
a farmer can't drain a parcel of land without getting permission anyway.
Right.
So why would they always the government want to pay them money which they can't do anyways?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, my results weren't constrained by any assumptions on ownership of the right to convert, anything like that. I'm finding that there is a discount. That implies that there is some option value to having that right to convert.
But they don't have an idea.
Well, and don't confuse regulations with enforcement.
They have the right to get that. They have the right to get the land.
Question to that?
That's right. Would you think it's a better strategy for the government to impose reductions, tax shields, and subsidies in the native areas, or raise taxes there, or is these payments better?
I don't know. I'm not sure I'm following your question exactly. So, sorry, are you asking is it better to tax drain?
Control over the conservation, to handle it through a penalty type way, or it's,
Right. I don't know. So from an economic efficiency perspective, giving the property right to the landowner or to members of society doesn't necessarily influence the efficiency of the outcome. That's kind of a question of fairness. So if you're taking away the right from the landowner, say giving it to other members of society, other members of society benefit at the expense of landowners. This is another institutional response. And I guess I wouldn't pass judgment on which one is better.
Well, along those lines, would you say that the SRP system was more efficient if it was or less efficient? If it was at the bottom end, 30% versus 60%?
Yeah. So that's a comparison of really payment mechanisms. So, yeah, this is. So a fixed payment scheme just offers up this flat payment schedule. Okay, so it doesn't matter what habitat you sign up, you get the same payment. An auction is an attempt to sort of trace out this line. Okay. An assumption with a lot of the auction literature is that landowners know more about their opportunity costs than the government. And so they in effect sort of game the system a little bit. And they're able to extract larger payments than their opportunity cost. Okay, and so the research by Kerwin and Roberts and Lebowski showed that, I guess, the price in the auctions was somewhere up here, okay, giving an average of a 10 to 40% premium. I'm finding about a 16% premium on average. The advantage of an auction is it does potentially get those higher valued landowners out there. Okay. A disadvantage is they can be really tough to run. So I haven't really seen really good evidence on the efficiency, or good empirical evidence on the efficiency of an auction versus a fixed payment scheme. Yes?
In terms of long-term conversion, is it more advantageous for a conservation agency than to try and ease low-value land now if you thought it was going to be converted, let's say, 20, 30 years into the future?
Potentially, because you're saying that it'll make more sense in the future to convert that land and so get it while it's cheap. Yeah, that could be an option.
So what would be, like, sort of thinking about that and thinking about maybe future climate change or the possibility of converting more land in Manitoba, what kind of advice would you give to a conservation agency for now?
I wouldn't pretend to give any advice to the agencies, to be honest. Yeah, so.
You need more study.
Good answer, Doug. No, I don't know what I'd say to them. So what this study doesn't do is it doesn't look at cost-benefit ratios of the habitat that's being protected. So it might be, so given this fixed payment scheme, they're focusing on that habitat. Okay, it might be the case that really high-valued land also has really high ecological benefits, and it would make sense to protect it. Or it might be that land out there is really not worth a lot ecologically, and it's okay to let it go to its highest use, which is annual cropland. Okay, so this isn't a cost-benefit study, so I can't really make comments on that. Don.
It's a quick question about your last study and looking at the spatial relationships for easements. And you mentioned as an example the community relations within that rural community. Have you thought about the sort of relationship of the field staff for the organizations and their familiarity with that region? Like when I look at those maps, I think of where's Herb. I'm thinking of Herb Golden and his colleagues like Alan Ransom, and you find a farm family that's very conservation friendly, and you sort of work out from that nucleus, and that farmer has neighbors that he knows would be probably good prospects for similar easements, and that might be almost like driven by the conservation community as opposed to the farming community. Are you considering those options too?
Yeah, I mean, I'll implicitly capture that in my estimates. I'm not going to be able to separately identify those factors, but that would be very interesting. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, a really good micro study would look at those types of relationships and networks.
That might be the outlier.
Good question.
The outlier. I don't know.
Any other questions? Yes.
Right.
Just kind of related to that, Chad.
Yeah.
The Nature Conservancy, is it a big player in Manitoba? Because they usually go for bigger blocks.
Yeah, I think so, but just not in the study region I had. So I think they were protecting stuff closer to Riding Mountain, so it was a little bit out of my study region. Not as big a focus on the prairie pothole type stuff, but they are a presence for sure. Yeah, that's right.
Did you have questions on?
Yeah, Tony.
Talk about the CRP and their auction. How competitive was that? Was it unlimited funds? I mean, quotation marks.
Yeah.
Like, was there there wasn't a scarcity, and the landowners could probably capture their opportunity costs or more, and not worry about getting kicked out of the auction. But when there's a scarce pool of money available, that might be different when you select the
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the CRP does have some scarcity. I think a problem with CRP is the relationship between the people running the auction and the actual landowners. I think there's a lot of communication about what you should be bidding, and so it's not really in a competitive type thing. People are submitting bids based on what representatives with the agency have told them are likely to be successful. And there's been some learning over time. So there's been repeated auctions. Landowners kind of get a sense of how much they can bid to sort of maximize the premium that they receive. Yeah. So yeah, there are problems with auctions in that respect, certainly.
Okay, I think I'll draw the questions to a close. Thank you for a very interesting presentation, and we do have our history of the faculty.
Oh, yes.
gift.
Perfect. Thank you very
go.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.